started right away. We're going to talk about the state longitudinal data system and how that's going to impact, in many ways, the whole network. And a lot of this discussion will be about, what's going to happen with the network as these things roll out. There's the ODE readiness assessment, and Angela and Michael should be on this call, right? Candace,
He just entered.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
So Angela and Michael, when we talk about the readiness assessment rollout, I think that maybe you could just give an update on the call that you were on. Mary Ann's going to talk a little bit about the SAS contract and how that's going to play out this year. We are hopefully going to have a start of the year webinar for RDLs. We'll be revising the map of the RDL system, and that follows a little bit about some of the changes that we're thinking about with the whole, because of the grant that we're getting. And finally, I do want to have a little bit of your thinking about the committees that we have in place right now, and given the situation for this year, what should we be concentrating on? What should we be sort of pushing off to another time? And is there other things that we should be thinking about? Shelby, Marianne, Allie, Chris, anything else that you can think of just agenda-wise? Not, why don't we get started? So who's doing the SLDS, Chris or you or Allie?
Allie.
Good.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all. So we've talked with this group before about the statewide longitudinal data system grant. We were awarded that grant. It is over $3 million to spend over the course of 4 years. Just a reminder, there are several pieces to the grant. The RDLs are one of those pieces. So the other pieces are building some data tools. One is, we're calling it an Ohio Equity Tool. That's looking at the equitable distribution of teachers throughout the state. One is an early warning system to flag students who are at risk. And then the RDLs come into play with becoming experts in those new data tools and being able to then train others and have those tools in your toolbox. So we're kind of in a renaissance of RDL-ness. So we are looking at several things that will kind of change the essence of the network. And the whole idea, I think the biggest change is the vision is to not just be about value added and EVOS. It is to expand what data help and assistance you all can give to districts that goes beyond value added. Especially important right now, that was kind of serendipitous with the virus and the grant, but the other things that we are looking at is the two tools that I just mentioned, special ed data, teacher evaluation data. And then Chris is going to talk about these readiness assessment tools that we have as well. So our goal is to give you all more training, to give you more skills and more tools to use with districts, to add value to what you can give to the districts, what you can offer. The other piece of the grant is not just the training, it is also a credentialing system. So the idea would be like right now, because you all went through SAS training, that you would be credentialed in value added. If you go through the early warning system training, you can become credentialed in the early warning system. You can stack these credentials and use those as selling points as you go out to districts to offer your services. So it could be down the road that we have RDLs who are not credentialed in value added, but are credentialed in special ed and early warning system. Totally different set of skills than what we traditionally think of as the regional data leads. We are in the process right now, in the grant process, of trying to craft an RFP, because the idea, the way we wrote the grant, was that the ESCs would create and deliver the training on these tools, obviously working with ODE and the subject matter experts that are building the tools, but that we would grant a contract to an ESC or some combination of ESCs, kind of like we did the training in the spring, and you guys would work to develop and deliver those trainings. You might need like a subcontract from a university or another entity, but the idea is that this is ESC driven training. And then coming up with, if you develop the training for early warning system, you would also develop the credential criteria for that same data tool. So that's kind of where we are. I will defer also to Marianne and Shelby and Matt, who are part of the team for the grant for this outcome, and see if I've missed anything, if there's any other interesting things to add.
Yes, so this is Marianne. So I think, Christy, you had asked in the chat whether the credentialing was limited to engaging in a training or if they're an assessment. And we're still talking through all of that as we put out the RFP, and we talk about with the two tools that we're building internally, with the other pieces of the grant, we'll obviously want to talk through with those stakeholders. But the thinking is we would have some kind of peer review on the course at least, and then there would be feedback as to whether a formal assessment of some kind would be needed to earn the credential, or if it's just assumed that the quality of the training is such that anybody who goes through it would be ready to do this. So stay tuned on that.
Yeah, I for one, would be really interested, not right now, but as you think about it, of what constitutes a credible credential.
Right.
One, because what we're thinking about is that this would actually help market the work that you do. People would realize that you have that expertise, and and we want that to mean something. So there's a trade-off, because we don't want to make this so onerous that no one's going to do it. And the other side of it, we want to make sure that it means something. So as I said, any thoughts that you might have, 9 o'clock at night when you're just thinking about things, just send along.
And I think we learned a lot of lessons from the spring when we did the other training and how we developed that RFP and all of that. So we want to be sure that we're co-developing this with you guys as we're thinking about it. We do have a meeting with Craig Burford tomorrow to just get some input from his perspective and the perspective of the ESC superintendents on the distribution of this money and what the RFP will look like, and what limitations we have in distributing the money and figuring it all out. So the idea here is to do some co-design of all of these things.
So you had said the two tools were the Ohio Equity Tool and the Early Warning System tool, but it sounded as if those were under development still. So
Correct.
I guess I'm curious on the timeline of, you're going to put out an RFP saying we want you to put an RFP to train it, but we really haven't seen the tools to know how to, I guess I'm just confused on how it will map out.
Sure. So,
Go ahead, Matt.
So for example, with the early warning system, there's a lot of work that's been done on how to use early warning system data. And I think that's, this is not just about using a tool. This is about how to interpret, how to use the data to make decisions. A lot of that training could be done early on. And then as the tool is developed, the tool is just a way of making it easy to get to the data that you would then be using. So Yeah, we've been thinking about how that might occur with training, and that will be part of the exercise that we'll go through with whoever's doing the contract.
And the teacher equity tool is really an extension of the teacher equity, educator equity reports that we're using now. So you, for those of you who are familiar with those things, it is not a start from scratch. It is building on those, adding some functionality and trying to make those more dynamic.
So hopefully you guys are excited about this. We see lots of opportunities to enhance what you all can offer and help move districts forward and really, continue in our goal of helping districts to maximize the use of data and really improve instruction and all of that.
But just a reminder that value added is one of those areas that would be developed. I mean,
Yeah.
Obviously the training piece is pretty much developed already. We've actually talked to SAS a little bit about, well, maybe we ought to rethink the training a little bit so that it fits into whatever credentialing system we have. So, yeah, that's another part of it.
Is there a timeline that you're aiming for here? I'm just up in Cuyahoga County, we're still in red and we're not really doing face-to-face trainings. And are we thinking this is like starting now and training now? And is asynchronous training an option? Are you thinking face-to-face?
Remember, this is a bureaucracy. There's got to be an RFP. There's got to be a process to get this money rolling. No, I think that the initial part of it is really geared towards the spring.
Okay.
So, but some of that, for example, we are talking, there is going to be hopefully planning on a value-added SAS training in the spring. So another cohort would happen then. But there, in some of these other areas, I think that that we at least the training of and remember, when we talk about the training here, we're talking about training of the RDL network to be prepared to work with school districts. Okay. Any other comments, questions?
Shelby, were you trying to add something to the conversation? You're not muted right now.
Oh, great.
But
That's
you are
great.
frozen.
You're
My
frozen
entire
in a
screen is
hilarious
frozen.
position.
Wonderful
I was just,
technology.
yeah, it looks as if it's muted and I'm not even in the meeting right now. The only thing I was going to add was, one of the pieces is about the online reporting system with the assessment data. And so as a tool, that entire reporting system already exists. There's training from Cambium that can be built into a larger curriculum about how to use that and woven into more of the item analysis and the use for improvement that is already happening in a lot of places. And so I think there are some in the RFP that will try to be very clear about the order of operations, what can be done a lot sooner than others as we wait for development, that there'd be work ongoing through those years and you can kind of map it out based on what's available already.
That's probably a great question, the second item here, right?
Yes.
Is there like this is Tom, is there like a framework or like an outline brainstorming document that you guys may have that may help, maybe get our focus going in a direction, or right now we're just still, everything's on the table.
Okay,
so
yeah.
just make sure I'm getting my brain wrapped around exactly. And you got my attention. It's now, how do I get my brain focused is what I'm looking at.
So there's a document that I think can share at this point, which is just simply the narrative of the grant proposal itself. And I mean, some of the things that we've been talking about right now have really come out of that. And we'll send that out to all of you.
Yeah, I can send that to you. If I'm smart enough, I can attach it to this chat, but I don't know that I'm that smart. So if I don't do that throughout this meeting, I will email it to you guys.
All right. Chris, do you want to chime in on?
Sure. So kind of a second big area where we have like some immediate focus and some resources to bring to the table is around assessment supports. And obviously using assessment data is a big part of what we do anyway. But there is a certain urgency around some of this information as it relates to sort of restart work and sort of understanding where students are as this year happens and all the things that means. So I know several of you were probably on the webinar that we did about a month ago around sort of some of the readiness toolkits that included some of the gap analysis and included some informal assessment work. And I know RDL has provided a lot of feedback on that. We think there's some interesting tools in there. I think we're really excited that we've now got some more formal assessment tools. We put out an announcement last week through the state testing portal. We're basically going to be reusing released test items. So high quality test items that have been out there that will be available. There will be full length tests for every grade and subject that, right now when a student takes a practice test, you can go on there and take a practice test, but it's really more about sort of the student experience of sort of getting a little bit of familiarity with the tests. But there's not a lot of data that's generated. This will actually allow students to take a full-length test, be machine scored, and give feedback back to the teacher. It will not be submitted to the state, so we're not going to collect data, but they'll have the ability to, across grades and subjects, do full-length tests at the beginning of the school year, and it will be available remotely. So there's a lot of potential power in this. And so not only will there be full-length tests, and we're calling those benchmark assessments, but there'll also be what we're calling checkpoint assessments, which are sort of smaller subsets of questions that are tied to reporting categories, kind of like 8 to 10 questions around a particular reporting category in any set of grade level standards, which can also be done remotely and give data back to teachers. So we think that this actually fills potentially a big hole and a big need in having sort of high quality assessment tools available from the get-go. And so obviously this is the kind of thing that there's a need for anyway. And in the big picture, we think that this is important, but also in this year, we think there's an incredible amount of need as people try to gauge where students are and to think about how that information can feed into planning. So a couple of things that will likely happen. One is that we're going to work on putting together another webinar, and it'll likely be because some of this stuff is happening very quickly. The Cambium AIR team will likely put a webinar together for RDLs, just in terms of here's what these things are, here's the functionality they have, here's sort of all the bells and whistles that are available, just sort of informational to get everybody up to speed. But what we are going to do is use some of our CARES federal dollars to support this work over the course of the next year. Now, again, these are all details to be figured out, but in terms of doing some informational sessions, doing some trainings, having at least a small subset of folks who sort of have some expertise in this area, who could provide some more in-depth supports. Again, sort of all to be determined, but we have committed and have told the feds we're going to do so. So that's a good step of of investing a fairly good chunk of federal dollars into supporting this work over the next year. And so these are things, while will likely come together quickly. Still a lot of details to be figured out. We're going to have some conversations with the association and with some various ESE superintendents, just to have some conversations about, we've got a chunk of money. It's not a chunk of money that necessarily goes a long way across 52 different ESEs, but sort of figuring out how to best strategize and get some of that out there and build some of the capacity. So I think it's something we're really excited about, and we're going to be looking for a lot of kind of thoughts and co-design on what things look like moving forward, but it will be happening fairly quickly. And Matt, I think we've got sort of like this. I know a few of you are involved in the work with the REL. It's sort of designed to sort of help districts think about how to use vendor-based assessments and the data that comes out of that to plug that into kind of an improvement mindset. In some ways, the work that's going to come, this work actually merges quite well with some of those lessons about how to use that data. And as this moves forward, we want to think about how those things complement each other. So I don't.
Yeah.
Matt, did you want to segue into that?
Right.
Piece?
We have Angela and Michael, who is trying to show me up with his tie on and everything. But that's okay. Why don't you guys give a little update on that discussion they had with the REL?
Sounds good. Yeah, we had Angela and I were on that conversation on the meeting, and what I really liked about it was it did seem like they listened to us, and it was nice to be heard, shall we say. A lot of good ideas were put out there, but we kind of whittle it all down to some specifics here. The toolkit that is going to be developed will provide a process that districts can follow to determine and help guide decision making. It'll be how to come up with the research question. It'll include suggestions for what data can be used. It will offer suggestions on how to analyze and interpret that data. And the RDLs will be trained on how to use this tool. We're going to be trained. We're looking at doing the RDLs training in September so that we can apply this and use this in the districts in October. And we did talk about some of those things where this is going to be a long-term type toolkit, if you will, because we know that we're going to be working with districts that are going to say, what can I do now for the kids that I have right now, especially your upperclassmen, your 11th graders and 12th graders, when there's not really much time to see where that learning loss or where that gap is. So I really like the idea of that thought, that this is going to be an ongoing process and it's really looking into the future. And Angela had a great comment about it, and they're going to employ it as a flowchart approach. And Angela, it's your turn. Talk about your flowchart.
So in order to try to hone in on the specific learning loss that has occurred, if learning loss has occurred, because that was a huge point too. There are some students that have really flourished in this type of remote learning and being independent to kind of go through the curriculum, self-paced sort of design. So we decided that it would be best offered in multiple parts. So maybe the first part would look like identifying if a learning loss occurred, right? And they stress using the assessments that are already available in your district, right? So we would have a flow chart. If your district had a vendor assessment, if your district did not have a vendor assessment that they utilized, or that this particular building in your district, right? And then part two would be more of looking at trend and analysis if learning loss has occurred, right? And again, flow chart depending on the type of district that you're coming from. And then maybe possibly part three is addressing that learning loss. And again, having a flow chart specified, not necessarily to give you exact directions of how to proceed, but questions asked because we are very familiar with our individual districts that we work with, and we know without a doubt that some are similar and some are vastly different depending on resources, structure, how they're developed. So the whole toolkit is surrounded by learning loss if it occurred, and then what to do about it if it did occur. And we asked for 4 different parts because our districts are at different parts, right? So some districts can progress through some of those parts very, very quickly. Other districts can just focus on part 1. So we're trying to manipulate the toolkit so that it's very individualized and it's very beneficial for the vast amount of districts that we serve and how different that they are. And then we have the freedom to utilize those parts how we see fit for those districts. We understand right now that they are under tremendous pressure of just restarting and just a plan to restart, right? And some districts haven't necessarily decided on that. So how we would engage those first couple of parts and when we would do that, we would be under jurisdiction that we would decide that because we were intimately involved in those districts. Questions on that about what either Michael or I have said?
Do either of you have the dates that were being proposed, Andy?
Yes, I can pull it up on my email real fast.
If I remember right, September 20, the 3 training dates, September 21st.
So, I mean, it's later in September.
Yes.
There'll be some information going out as soon as we nail those down.
So we had the 3 dates, Angela. I think it was the 21st and the 28th are good, and the 30th was offered, but that's going to be a conflict.
Okay.
Is that a 1-day training or are those like a multiple day?
I
Like
think
those
that's
options.
my understanding. It's a 1-day.
Right. So we asked them to give us options and have the same training available at different options. So because we understand how busy you guys are. So at least you have 3 options to choose from.
But the timing was to have them have everything up, ready, reviewed at the end of August, and then have training set for before September's over so that we can get into the schools in October. We just felt that was a good timeline. Any longer than that, and we're kind of missing and trying to get all this done before that, and we'll be cramming.
All right. Any other questions, concerns? And also about the readiness rollout, assessment rollout. Nothing. Okay.
I had a question.
Yep. Go ahead.
This is Sherry. I had a question. I was trying to open the project narrative and I don't think it's opened yet. So maybe some of the answers are in there, but as Michael was describing this process that school districts are going to go through, it sounded like a problem solving process where you're looking at data and you're just so, you know, our state does have a problem solving process where we look at data, and I'm wondering how those two will work together. Was there any thought in designing, and I mean, are they going to be similar? Are they going to fight each other? I think you know where I'm going with this question. Let me know if you don't.
Michael, Angela, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think we definitely understand where you're going with that situation, and I don't think that, well, the hope, you know, we're not in charge of designing it. REL is, we're in charge of giving feedback, but I think our hope is to work in collaboration with that. I think it was specifically, our hope is it's specifically designed to target the learning that occurred within the pandemic, right? And because some of those assessments that we were used to giving in the spring, we're not giving, whether that's vendor, state testing, those types of things, and then how assessments might look a little bit different this year, depending if you're hybrid and remote. I think districts are very able to look at traditional school years and evaluate some of the data that goes through that typically. But I think this program is going to target when they find themselves in unique situations. So it is not the intention that it would compete against any problem solving 5-step process or any of that type of thing that you have implemented in your district already, but maybe add some new perspectives for the specific situation that we're in. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And also I did, somebody had put the project narrative in the chat and I wasn't able to sign into it unless I'm doing something incorrectly. So I don't know if there's a different link or if I just need to go somewhere else to see that.
It's the project narrative for SLDS, first of all.
Mhm.
Second of all, it's on our SharePoint site, so I think I have to grant you access. So if you click on, I would like access or request access, I'll get an email and let you in.
Okay, sounds good. No problem.
Okay. Somebody has a dog around barking or somebody's barking, whatever, watch that. Just another, just my own take on Sherry's question is that, part of this is motivated by the fact that given that we don't have the normal data available, what do we do with other data that we do have available, and how do you sort of make inferences from that? So I think it supplements the normal process of looking at of these data that we have.
And Matt, I'd just like to add to that. One of the things, Angela was talking about, just that critical, the idea that how are we going to appropriately address the loss that has happened. One really concerning thing for me is that, I keep hearing districts talking about, those losses, those gaps, and that they're going to spend the first X portion of the year going back to that content, as opposed to, integrating into those critical areas of focus and keeping the depth at that grade level, and just kind of going back and pulling things, or, how can we kind of use this as a stair step to where we need to be now? Unfortunately, I mean, if our districts just take that of, hey, here's our gaps, here's our loss, we're going to spend this amount of time making up for last year, it's just going to push our kids further and further behind. So I think that tool, the assessment piece, all of these things together is going to be really critical for RDLs to help districts be able to make sense of it and appropriately with the standards on how to kind of scaffold, integrate, and make like a productive learning environment for our kids. So I'm off the soapbox, but that's a difficult one.
Yeah. Okay. Then we'll move on to the next topic. Update on the SAS contract. Mary Ann, you want to fill them in?
Sure. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? All right. So obviously we did not have spring testing, so we're not going to have 2020 value added. So we've been talking with SAS about what we can do and what we obviously can't do. So one of the things they are going to do is continue to display the 2019 reports. But it's only going to be in the secured site. So, when you go to the EVOS website, there are two buttons. One is public site, which you don't need a username and password to get into. And then there's secured site, where you do need the username, password, because you can do things like drilling down and seeing, individual student data and teacher data if you have those levels of permissions. So we are going to take the public site offline because we've figured that just causes more questions than answers. but we are going to keep the secured site so that districts and schools can deal with their data and can continue to go back and look at, first of all, the 2019 reports, and some of those diagnostics and decision trees and the decision dashboards and things like that. The other thing we're having SAS do, however, is what we're calling pulling forward those student success reports. So in the student success reports, there are 3 different unique pieces of data. We've got the test history, and for most students, the vast majority, that won't change. We are sending them, there were a few students who took fall of 2019 end of course tests. There's a few high schools that have block classes. There were a few tests that had semester, those kinds of things. So if a student did take a fall test, we're going to go ahead and send it. And those would be updated in the test history. So, you will see a few tests from fall of 19, and just know those are not being used for anything, for growth or anything like that. It's simply to provide another data point for those teachers who have the students now in the fall of 20 for the 2021 school year to know that, that student did, for example, take a government test or did take an Algebra 1 test or whatever it might be. The second thing that's in there is that they do projections to tests that right now what's in there is tests that would have been taken in the spring of 2020. So they're using, for example, a student's 3rd and 4th grade tests from 17-18 and 18-19 to predict how they would do on the 5th grade tests when they took them, if they had taken them in the spring of 2020. And so obviously those kids didn't take those tests, and most likely they're no longer in 5th grade. They're now coming back into 6th grade. So we're going to pull forward those projections. SAS can use the same data and project another year out. So we are going to have them move those kids up. And we are in the process of getting enrollment files. We're working with another partner that keeps enrollment data to say, here's the grade level where the student is and the school and district where the student's going to be enrolled in the fall of 2020 when they come back to school here in another week, or some of them actually have already come back. And so that those teachers, again, that are seeing them and teaching those classes this year will be able to see, presumably in the spring of 2021, now Johnny's a 6th grader, how is he likely to perform on those 6th grade assessments? And what are it breaks it down based on sort of a % chance of getting into each of the ranges, advanced, accelerated, proficient, and basic. And or it provides a scale score potentially for them. So it talks through, so we are updating that. We are pulling kids forward. And then the other thing that we do are projections to ACT and SAT for any student in the 7th grade and up. And so again, what we have in there now are the 7th graders and up from the 2019-20 school year. We will be pulling those kids forward again. So kids who last year were in the 6th grade now are moving up to 7th grade would have that ACT or SAT projection. And for that, we project probability of reaching the remediation-free score. So we are trying to provide some additional data to the best of our ability. And obviously where you come in is, taking a look at those, just as one more piece of data. We obviously say, you want to have a complete set of data. There will be a lot of data in the fall. Some of the things that Chris and Allie have discussed with some of the other learning tools that we've got. And but this is just one more thing that can be added as those teachers are trying to reset and restart for the school year. So the other thing that SAS is doing for us is that they're just doing some general discussions and work around what does it mean to have a gap year of data. What we're referring to as a gap year analysis, because we know that, there will be certain students for whom, they didn't have 3rd grade tests last year. They're now in 4th grade, which is normally when you begin to get value added. So how do we handle that? And the fact that now 4th grade for them is going to be their baseline. And so we're just, over the next few months, we're going to be working with the vendor to talk through what makes sense moving forward. And obviously when we, get some information from them, this group would be somebody that, we may come to for advice or come to talk some things through. So I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up as to what to expect. Our hope is, again, we're still kind of working through all of the issues, but our hope is that those student success reports will be available about the time the report cards are released in mid-September, that they'll be able to release what we're referring to as the updated EVAS secured site, and we'll be able to give teachers and schools that information pretty quickly. So we're working on getting those enrollment files to them now so that they can update where the students are attending school for the upcoming school year. So that's kind of where we are with that. Questions from anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
Is the dashboard going to be updated, or is it still the old dashboard?
The decision dashboards?
No, they had made some updates to the value added, was going to look differently.
Oh,
and I think
right.
we were, yeah.
Marianne, not hearing you. Okay. So can you go, Marianne? There?
Yeah, did I?
Yeah, you cut off a little.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it's saying my internet's unstable. I'm going to turn my camera off here and see if that helps. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So they are going to be making some updates at some point. Again, because of they were also obviously affected by this and we're working from home and closures. They are going to be rolling out a site. And one of the things that we've talked with them about is before they do what we're referring to as the big changes in the design of the EVAS website, we do want to talk through them having a webinar or some kind of a communication with the regional data leads so that you can see what the changes are and kind of go through them.
So when it gets updated in September, it will be the new dashboard or it will not be?
My understanding is they're not going to update it right away, in part because they also were working from home and are behind in doing some things. And because we originally were planning, sometime now, we had looked at like the end of July, beginning of August, of doing that webinar with the RDLs to talk through all of the changes and bring you up to speed on what changes you were going to see. They are making some minor changes to some text. They've changed just some standardized text, and they are going to go ahead and do those to the old website. So that's what we're sort of calling the minor changes. But when they actually redesign the reports themselves, we will try to get something scheduled with them before we can, that would go live. And that'll be later in the fall, some other release.
So last winter, or I guess it was last winter or so, SAS did a webinar on the student success reports. And Marianne, did they recorded those, didn't they, or that webinar?
SAS?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they talked through the information.
Right.
That was on.
So the question I would have is if that's sufficient, or would it be worthwhile to have SAS do a brief update for people on that portion of it, since that will be one of the main things that's available new this year. Any thoughts? I mean, if it's not going to be something that's of great value, then maybe we won't bother with it. You can just go to the recording from the last one. Give that some thought. If there's any interest in it, just let us, Marianne and myself, know about it, and we'll.
Mindy, did you have a comment?
I do have one other question. I'm a little bit considering how My question is, do you have any data or information on how reliable the projections are? When we're going back so many years, I think it's a good tool of like, here you can look at the old data to see how they were, but you're getting back a little bit more in time. So if we had a little bit of saying, hey, these projections are really reliable, it might help districts and teachers kind of want to go down this path.
Well, SAS actually has some experience with a gap year with Tennessee because they didn't test one year. And so that question we can bring to them and say, what did you learn from that? And I mean, clearly they're at least confident enough that they want to roll it out. But we can be a little bit more assertive about how we ask that of them. Thanks.
So Matt, I have a question.
Kathy, go ahead.
So you said SAS has experience with a gap year where tests were not given.
Yes.
But I'm not convinced that that's similar to a gap when instruction does not take place or is minimalized. So do they have any correct for that?
Sure. And actually, I mean, that introduces another factor in here, which is sort of, what was the learning loss kind of issue.
Right.
That is a research question that we need to pursue, and we're going to pursue that with SAS. But that's, we're not going to learn much until we have the data in. Hopefully, we'll be testing in the spring, and we'll get some data, and then we'll start to learn what those issues were. But when I talk about the gap, I mean the fact that this is more of a technical issue with the modeling itself. Mm. So does the model do a good job of projecting or showing gains if it didn't have that data? So what we'd be doing is actually taking the 17 through 19 data and then pulling out the 18 data and saying, okay, now does that result in similar kinds of results from the model? So that's more of a technical issue than it is an educational issue.
Yeah, but SAS is talking about they do have some ideas for how to look at learning loss, but they really need the 2021 data point to then go back and say, okay, certain students have lost more than others, certain types of students, potentially, or maybe not. I mean, I think somebody said on here earlier that some of the kids have actually done better than maybe they otherwise would. So it could be that those students are more engaged.
Yeah, and now another kind of tangential issue here is also the availability of the demo site. Marianne, they did say that they were going to put that up, right?
Yeah, the demo site's going to stay just, as is. When they do the big update and they, the look and feel of the reports changes, they also are going to change the demo site to match that. And that's honestly, another reason why we're doing this in a later rollout, because again, they were all working from home and still pretty much still are working from home, just like we all are. So, everything's just kind of delayed a little bit compared to where we hoped we'd be in the fall of 2020.
Just to add to their pleasure, they had an earthquake down there the other day.
Yes.
Speaking of demo sites, just so you know, that's something that at least is on my mind as we work with the SLDS grant. And I might be asking a few of you specifically about how we might be thinking about that for certain areas. Some things like teacher data, you can get access to actual data fairly easily, but with other student data, that might sometimes be difficult. So we've been talking about how that might fit into the development, say, of the tools that were being developed. Things like
whoever developed the Ohio ES that did the ETPAs into OES with their training demo site, it's amazing. And it's just got, you're set up in there and you have all the functionality, you pick your role, it's got some dummy people to play with. It's really helpful.
Yeah, and Mindy, that's an area that we're hoping to make sure that the training that develops out of the SLDS grant for Ohio for teacher evaluation is built right on top of what's already happened right now. So there are a lot of things that we need to make sure is linking and call our attention to it any time on those sorts of things. All right, any other questions about plans with SAS and this year, the rollout this year? Don't hear anything, don't see anyone raising their hand.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So start of the year webinar. Last year we did have a start of the year webinar, featured Chris Woolard for the most part, and I'm going to assume that he's going to be taking the lead on it this year as well. But are there particular topics that you think would be helpful, useful, important? Let me throw that out as just to get your sense of what should we be talking about. Otherwise, you're going to hear about his kids and all the trials and tribulations.
I think I'm not sure when certain things will be available at OD, but I believe Shelby was working on some local report card things with describing the what will be available, things like that. I think that would be a good thing for the fall for RDLs to kind of wrap their heads around what's available just at a glance.
Shelby, are you on?
Yep.
Yep, there you are. So what's the timing of the rollout with the report cards?
Yeah, so the materials, the initial materials actually went out earlier this week. So I have it on my to-do list to send out a note to the whole listserv with the link to that information. And we'd be happy to talk about it more at a school year kickoff. The report cards will be released same time as always, mid-September, looking at September 15th this year. And in between now and September 15th, there should be another document coming out that we're calling a user guide. So some of you might be familiar with the approximately 30-page report card guide that comes out. We're doing kind of a condensed version that's just really focusing on what data will be reported this year, and if there are kind of caveats about how to interpret anything that will get reported, since, for example, like attendance will be on there and the chronic absenteeism rate will be on there, but we should be thinking about that data slightly differently based on what the reporting guidance was that came out from the temporary law changes. So we're trying to just have a shortened document that goes into some of that detail. So in between the high level look and a technical document will be this shorter user guide. So that's where we're working on communication side for the report card.
Let me just point out that Shelby hasn't been around long enough to become a real bureaucrat, because she said that she's going to shorten the guide this year. With almost nothing of a report card, you should make the guide much longer, right?
I like to try to throw the perception off for those that know me, even though it's only been 4 years. I do try to shorten stuff, and I will fight as much as I can against lengthening things, but we even shortened it last year, so you're welcome. Kathy had her hand raised.
Yeah,
if you had a question.
Yeah, I was also thinking it's always good to remind districts about how EMIS reporting links to the report card, and the critical piece is that just because you don't see a report in this year's report card doesn't mean you shouldn't be assuring that that data that will flow into that section the next year is not being reported diligently. So I think it helps people to just know those connections and be reminded of them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kathy. And we're trying to be really clear as well about what's in the secure data center, what will be available in download files, because in some cases you might not see the data on a download file or you might not see it on like the website version, but it will be in an Excel sheet version. So we're going to try to be pretty clear about where you can get what. And we definitely didn't want folks to lose their good habits of checking their data and making sure it's correct just because there might not have been some of it this year. So a fine line.
Some of them may be assuming, oh, we're really, really lucky. We won't have to take tests again this year and there won't be reporting next year. You know, there's always that element going on out there. So making sure people know that don't assume that because something happened this year that it will happen again next year. Those reminders.
Okay, Tom?
I want to add on to something else, you know, kind of what Kathy was saying is that I've actually heard like offhand remarks from administrators like, oh, we don't have to worry about data this year. You got to make sure if anyone has some great suggestions, I see everything, you know, how do we continue that? I get text messages all day about, oh, we don't have to do, no, you know, keep the practice. It's just not the evaluation piece where reminding people that data is more than just what goes into evaluation.
That's
it's
just
important that. So I just think that if anyone has good ideas on how to talk to teachers and administrators about the importance of it, and don't worry about it because it's not evaluated, or like Kathy, like you said, oh, no test, we don't have to worry about it. No, data is important to make this good decision. So
thanks, Tom. Yeah, that's a really good point. And if those messages, if you're sharing them, please make sure to loop me in. We've been trying to really message out about what data we do have available is important for both information and planning, even if it's, and especially if it's not getting a grade attached, separate that out. The data is really important for your planning and strategies you're selecting. So as you guys develop some of those messages or find things that are resonating, especially with those audiences of teachers and the district staff you work with, please let us know so we can help reiterate that from our side too.
Do we want in a beginning of the year webinar to talk about these readiness assessments? I'm hoping that we'll have a webinar ready to go at some point very soon because let me make sure I have the right dates. The checkpoints will be live August 31st and the benchmarks will be live on the 17th. So we're hoping to have a webinar just for RDLs, but maybe reiterating, maybe having a whole section on readiness data would be helpful. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, I like.
And speaking of dates, you know, we have not picked a date for this kickoff webinar. Is there kind of a time frame that you think would be most appropriate? What's too early? What's too late for you?
Well, a lot of the districts in Central Ohio that originally were starting in towards the middle of August have moved their starting dates back to end of August, beginning of September. And I'm assuming that some of that is going on all over. So I don't know what kind of impact that has on our selection of dates, but it would seem as students are coming back, whatever way they're coming back, whether it be virtually or face-to-face, that there's more need for people not to be away at trainings or to be engaged. But maybe I'm wrong. It may not affect this group the same way. I don't know. It's just a thought.
That's the same thing going on up here in Cuyahoga. They're pushing back.
So when I guess I'm trying to get a sense of when would this information be most useful for you, and
the sooner the better, Matt, because I think all of what we're talking about are going to be things that kind of kick off the year for, you know, districts, you know, whether they're, you know, pre-assessing kids or, you know, we're having those discussions about learning loss, those types of things that will be critical.
And maybe we're not giving or leading trainings right at a certain time because so many people cannot come because school is just beginning. So maybe that would be a good time to pull us together because we aren't going to be doing some of those other trainings. towards the end of August, beginning of September.
Mhm.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree. The sooner the better.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. If you do have any other thoughts about specific topics that you think would be helpful, make sure that you send them our way.
Matt, this is Jackie. I'm just
Yes.
assuming that the topics we've talked about that you've updated us would also be on that list, so that all the RDLs kind of understand the SLDS and the changes, or how SAS is going to accommodate not having any data from last year.
Yeah, I think that we'll get more. We certainly will be getting more information out about the SLDS. I don't know how how set things are going to be. That you talk about getting a webinar sooner. It might be worthwhile to just mention it and then come out with more information afterward. I'm thinking right now about a start of year webinar that's going to help you get started with the year.
Gotcha.
So the readiness assessment rollout, I'm sure, will be prominent. Okay, up to now, some of you might remember that we do have a department website with RDLs, and it has on that website a map and a listing of RDLs, and there are approximately 80 people listed on there. All of you are. So the way that map, you might recall, got put together was basically people who went to SAS and were designated by their organization as being an RDL, we put on the map. Things are changing a little bit, and I think all the comments that Ali made about the SLDS grant and how we're looking at sort of expanding that notion of who are the RDLs is will have a big change in this, how we look at this. What we're considering is we'd have people on there and list credentials down the road. Now the credentials aren't there right now, so we're trying to think through what would be the most appropriate way to deal with this at this time. So what our plan is, and I'd really like to get your feedback on this, is to send out a message to all the SST directors and ESC superintendents, basically saying, here are your RDLs. Here's who's on the map right now. Here's what an RDL is supposed to be doing. Who have you got that should be on there, and make sure that we want to make sure that we've got the correct information. We'll also be sending to you at the same time some, the heads up, your boss got this message. So we could end up with a lot more people, many of whom have not gone to SAS. And the way that we would be putting that on the map is we'd simply acknowledge that for those of you who've gone to the SAS training, you have the SAS training. We don't call that a credential at this point because we haven't decided what a credential means, but designate those who have gone to SAS and had that SAS training, and other people would not have that designation. Thoughts? You can't throw anything at me at this point. One of the good things about telecommuting like this.
I think Matt, when that list goes out or those emails go out, want to make sure who are actual doing RDL work and who have been volunteered as RDLs, who, because they were trying to find someone, they put a name in there, and that's not really what they're doing. I mean, not that they're trying to push it off, but that's not the work they do, and they've just been the one in the office that got that designation. Right. And we want to make sure that when people are looking at that list, and I know Suzette did a lot of work to put it together, and the people were on there were the ones that were, hey, reach out to me. I want to be helpful. I want to be impactful. And then there's others that are kind of behind the scenes that no fault to their own, or maybe not involved as much, and more of a support of maybe they're supportive to other RDLs. I'm not
Let
sure.
me, yeah. Let me just add one other thing that I forgot to mention. We're sending this to all the ESC superintendents. So there are about 10 or 11 ESCs that don't even have an RDL at this point. So I would say that in context of what you just said. I fully expect that you're right, but I don't know other than to highlight who has had the experience or the training, to say, well, this is the real person, as opposed to these people are not.
Well, and this will evolve. I mean, this will continue to evolve as we get the training and we have more people that are credentialed. Some will be credentialed in some areas, some will not. It almost makes sense that we either color code them on the map, which could get very cluttered, or we just have different maps or different sections. So these are the people, and this is the map that has this type of credentialing. If you need support and early warning indicators, these are your people and these are the places to go. And it might be that your name's on several maps, but to me, that would be the clearest way. I don't know if that's a nightmare logistically for websites.
Almost like a filtering, like, you can click the
Yes.
radio button that says value added, and then certain people populate the map, or you can click whatever.
Right.
Yep. Matt, wasn't that your idea originally of the map? That's what you wanted.
Yeah, we're bumping up against the capability of putting together something on the OD website.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I want to get these I want to hear your suggestions, because whether they're feasible or not, I don't know. But we need to transition into an environment where we think of it as who are credentialed in what areas, and so that people can have some that there builds up that credibility for the people who who are being approached by the districts. Districts have to become good consumers of that information, and we have to teach them a little bit about it. But that's a very different environment, I think, than it was before we started the network, and there was a couple dozen of you who everybody knew, really, and that was how things got to be known, and people got word. Any more thoughts?
I guess I'm just wondering about the order. Like, we have a current map with the current value added, and we're talking about reinventing this with credentials. Does it make sense then to wait until after we have the credentials established before we redo the map?
Right. Or at least have an idea of what we want it to look like. And then,
well, part of the issue is also trying to make sure that we get the kind of a statewide coverage. And clearly the bottleneck here is the unwillingness of some ESCs to send anyone to SAS. Well, that doesn't make any sense in that framework that we described with the SLDS. We certainly wouldn't want that, and most of that training wouldn't have that feature of travel. What was it, Mindy?
It looks good.
Yeah, it did look good.
I forgot to get French bread, so my girls are making some bread for dinner tonight.
Gotcha.
Nice.
So going back to SLDS and the map, I think that it's important that we start communicating out to people, the ESCs and the SST directors, ESC superintendents and SST directors, that there's an intentional aspect to this, that we are trying to assure that that there is statewide coverage, and that the underlying purpose of it is to get people knowledgeable in how to use data and how to explain to school people how to use data to improve education. So that we get you know, we aren't stuck on just one piece of it, as important as that might be. So you know, I really think that now's the best time. I mean, this is sort of a strange year all around, but I think it's a really good time to take a step in that direction. Now, you could convince me that there's another step, but just having the same map is not a step in that direction.
No.
So you want to, if I can paraphrase, you want to portray that we're growing this, that it's evolving, that it's more people are coming on board that have or that are willing to do this work and grow this expertise and support districts.
Yeah.
So you want to improve upon the current map in that, with that in mind. Is that right?
Yeah, I would fully expect that we would have a map that would include all the ESCs, all the SSTs, and have you know, probably more like 120 to 130 districts, people listed.
Yeah, I
and
think it's going to blow up more than that. If there's really, I think that
could be.
I mean, I think we could be looking. I guess I'm just even considering our own ESC. You know, if they're, you know, we have our list of consultants. You know, what's stopping us from putting all of the consultants in that work? They all work with districts and with data. We just haven't had all of them trained in SAS. And according to this, like, they don't really have to be. They're just not going to have that credential. So I could see a lot of ESCs engaging a lot more people in the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it's the same for SSTs too. Every consultant at the SST meets with the district. We look at the data, we help them with root cause analysis. We have to go through this process of analyzing data, and value added is part of it, even though not everybody went to SAS. So I agree with Christy in that sense that
there will be a lot. Okay.
So is that bad?
Yeah.
Is that bad? Will that like clutter up the map and make it meaningless, or what do you all think?
I think it needs to be a different map.
I do too.
I mean, maybe it's just COVID is on my brain, but maybe it's a heat map by county where you can show this, you have this dark red color in this area where you have all these places and this number of people. You know, you have, I don't know, if you want to show that lots of people are available to help districts understand their data, and then in hot pockets, or I don't know, then maybe a heat map type of Ohio would work.
But I think some of what we have to decide is, what is the purpose of the map? Are we just wanting to show everyone who has every different or has met every different criteria, or has got, you know, availability to help in this area or with this type of data? Or are we saying these are people that are willing to go out and serve anyone? You know, I mean.
Well, I think it goes back to the comment that a couple of you have made, that there are a lot of people in your agencies who work with data, who work with school districts. Right. But the goal here is to assure that, you know, first of all, that's a good thing that there are a lot of people. But the goal is to make sure that there's some quality control that districts can be assured of in doing that. And you know, there are different ways there are different expertises that people have around the use of data. So, you know, long run, we use the credentialing. Short run, we start putting the onus on the superintendents and directors to start to say, well, yeah, okay, who's on board that we have who works with data. And Christy, if that means that they've got 20 people, you know, that's fine. But I think that maybe that some of this is the wording that we put on the map. I mean, you know, it's not like it's not like school districts in your area are totally unfamiliar with the ESC and who they go to, and I'm not saying that this website with a map is the only piece of information that districts have, but we need to start to structure it in a way that is consistent, at least, with where we're heading. So, maybe I'm suggesting that you need to sort of bite the bullet now, because down the road you don't want it to be totally misunderstood why why there are all these other people on there. Right. And so I'd be willing to suggest that some of you who are really have some vision in not necessarily fully formed, but have some way of thinking about how that might look, to work with us to put something together. The first step is to get information from the superintendents and the directors. I think that we have no way of knowing who really is working with data other than what your agencies tell us. And the RDLs to get this message, because they're on the map right now, they'll also get the message. I think it's incumbent to them to help guide their superintendents in how they're responding to it.
I may be misinterpreting this, but so I'm just going to say it. So when you send out this email to superintendents, shouldn't you clearly define about what level of expertise they should have to be qualified for working with data? I mean, like Christy had said, I think there's probably everybody in our ESC could be considered working with data. But I think if you send out an email to the superintendents that what you're looking for as expertise or how to define that, I think that's a little bit clearer. I think if you just send out an email to superintendents about whoever is your data person and works with data, they're going to be very confused. I think the email, if you're going to send out an email before all the credentialing things happen to kind of get a group of people together, I think it definitely has to be clearly defined about maybe the level at which they work with data.
Yeah, I think it does. And I weigh that in terms of, how much is anyone reading the message. So, you can go into a lot of detail and then no one reads it. But I agree. I think that it's as much as we can define what it means to be an RDL, reminding them here's what we believe is an RDL, but it has to go beyond just going to SAS, because right now that's a stumbling block for the network in some of those in some of the ESCs. And there's another issue here. There's a whole bunch of people, maybe 20 or 25 or so, who did not go last spring because it got canceled and won't have another opportunity until next spring. Mm-hmm. So, you can't say that they went, and, I mean, that's another issue here that we're trying to grapple with.
But aren't we supposed to be putting people on the map who are able and willing to go out and work in districts with districts on data? So we don't want people on this map who can't do that.
Well, do you think a superintendent who's an ESC doesn't care?
Well, the purpose of the map is to help districts.
Yeah.
To identify people they can call on.
Yes.
So you don't want somebody on the map who is not going to be, quote, allowed to go out and work in districts.
Right. So that's an expectation that
the
expectation is that you're doing that.
So I go back to what Angela said in regards to having just some criteria around that. For example, here we have a data person. but the data work that she does is not directly connected to value added and RDL work. And so my fear would be that email would go to Shannon. Shannon's going to respond and say, yes, we have a data person. It's so-and-so. And that's not what you're looking for. And so I think that we probably just need to have some language around exactly that RDL language.
Right.
But is the point of this though to extend beyond value added, like to gifted data, to, you know, like,
Yes.
I mean, if that is the point, might you have, I mean, you may have a wide variety of folks on there. You may have preschool folks on there. If they're dealing with, you know, it may look different, I guess.
Well, I think about that, this vendor, ODE's approved vendors, that spreadsheet that came out, I think it was yesterday, or was publicized yesterday, with, where it indicated all the vendor assessments and what they could be used for. You know, as I think about something like that, that would indicate people who are skilled in the use or interpretation of various types of data like that were on the chart.
Yeah. In the end, what we need is a list of people who, A, have some skills working with data, B, have skills working with school districts around the data, and C, not to have in the minds of people that it's only someone who went to SAS. So, I mean, it's not an anything goes situation, but I will tell you that there will be at least one superintendent out there who looks at that and reacts the same way that you said a moment ago. Well, I'll just list everybody.
Yeah.
But, you know, then when we go back to school districts and say, you know, the ESC superintendent says that anybody here can do this, and they have a bad experience, that creates issues for that superintendent, ESC superintendent.
And I guess, Matt, the way that it's being worded right now, I could fit anybody on my team in that description, because they're all working with data in various capacities. Some may be focused more on, you know, like it may not be, I mean,
if they are, that's great. I mean,
really,
if you're delimiting it some way to say that so here's a distinction that we probably have to make. This is not about working with data as in the EMIS coordinators.
Okay. So
what about, I mean,
I think we're gonna have to put some parameters, because I mean, and it could get really large, and maybe we want it to get really large, and maybe we want this to more people to be involved in the PD and learn new things and grow their capacity in different areas, and that's great. But I think we just have to wrap our heads around, you know, what could happen and who people could nominate, and be okay with that, even if some don't have, I mean, if they don't have the value added, but let's say they are more early childhood, is that okay? You know, do we want to, I mean, and it sounds like that may be where we're going eventually, but.
Yeah.
What happens if we're a little bit more simplified? And I've heard both Chrissy, you and Candace kind of say something about, you know, like my team, I got all these people. What if it's more of a point person, so that if they reach out to my ESC, they're reaching out to me, I may be able to answer their question. But if it's a little bit more in depth on a specific, like you had mentioned, preschool data, then I could at least now associate and direct them to somebody else. But then at least we kind of see where it's coming from and where it's being tracked through, so that the point person may be able to answer 90% of the questions and then move it forward. I don't want to turn us into, you know, being the operator, but at the same time, I think most of the questions that come through my office are I could answer quickly.
Tom,
and then needs to. So.
And you know who to send it to if you can answer it.
I love my superintendent, but I don't think he would know He's just going to send it. It's going to come back to me anyways.
That's all right. That's all right. I mean, in a
Maybe
way,
later.
by sending it out to you at the same time, you can be proactive and help make that decision. But
Right.
here's the other, but here, as I said, there's 11 ESCs that don't have any, and a couple of SSTs that don't have any RDLs. Most SSTs and ESCs have only one person anyway. And I suspect that what we're going to get back is that person, because that's what the understanding is at this point. But deciding on who's a point person among the ESC, among the personnel where the ESC has more than one, is a decision that might be very difficult.
So I guess as long as we know it's coming, maybe we could help get on, because we know what the superintendents are going through right now.
Yeah.
Maybe we could just help,
Right. And Matt, I would suggest that won't be that difficult for them to identify a point person. So if we do have a list of RDLs and you have a point person, that if the superintendents had to identify that person, I think they could. I don't think it would be an issue.
And I also think that's better because honestly, in some areas of the state, the RDL network is just still emerging as a network, right? And people are, I think some people are very clear about what we do, and some people are still a little confused about what we do. So I'm panicked about turning that map into hundreds of people now, and now everybody is super confused about who the RDL is, who has what credentials, who works with what area of the state. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm all for opening our doors wide open, more people better. Love that idea. But I'm still concerned that people don't really have an idea of what the RDL network is. And if now all of a sudden we've got, 42 people from one ESC because they work for data, now everybody's going to be super confused about what the network is.
Well, is that Angela?
Yeah. Angela, sorry, I just didn't say that.
That's okay. That's okay. So, I think the little bit I've heard in discussions about the RDL network among the ESC superintendents and with the SST directors, and Michelle, you might chime in on some of this, is that they're not sure what it should be. And I think that a lot of the angst that you've expressed so far is probably a result of just that. And maybe this is going to be a little bit of a learning experience for them, but I think in the long run it's going to help you if they've been hearing a lot of good things about what you do, and they can't really put their fingers on what it should be. And I think that we need to start putting that in front of them to recognize, because it's not like some of the positions that are well understood in as roles in OEDs, for example. It is by definition a fairly fluid kind of thing, and what it looks like for some of you in some parts of the state, it looks very different than in other parts of the state. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, we really want to tap into a lot of expertise that isn't there yet, that hasn't been involved yet. And it does make it life difficult, because there's a lot of overlap with roles that people play. And I understand that a lot of you wear several hats, and some of it is not really about data. So it's going to be messy.
So Matt, maybe we can come to some conclusion here. I don't know. I think your urgency in updating the map was that ESCs and SSTs don't currently have designated RDLs because they haven't been to SAS training, but that doesn't mean that they don't have some expertise in their ESCs. And then there were some other issues where people had left and you just want to have the most updated information. Does it make sense to just correct those issues? So those ESCs and SSTs where the person hasn't yet made it to training because of the pandemic, maybe asterisk those and say, this person hasn't been to SAS, but they are willing to be out there helping you. Leave the rest of the map alone until we are further along in the SLDS process of credentialing and all of that. And then we can kind of reconceptualize that map as people get credentials.
And then what do we do about the ones that don't have anybody?
That's what I'm saying. We reach out to those ESCs and SSTs that don't currently have anyone who has been to SAS.
Yeah.
But to say, do you have somebody who is capable and willing to go out and work with districts to help them use their data?
And suppose they come up with 4 people or 5 people or 6 people. So I'm just saying that you have the problem of you haven't given that opportunity to everybody else. I understand what you're saying.
So maybe you ask for one person, one name
if you
that
don't have
would
one.
be the data support contact for that entity.
So
one name.
If at this point an ESC has no one, that tells me, and you've asked repeatedly, that tells me they don't have an interest in that work. That's just what is. So when someone goes to the map, they're going to look at what is the next county doing? What is the next neighboring ESC doing? Is there someone there? And that's a service that is then provided, maybe free, maybe at a cost. I don't know how the ESC is structured for that type of thing, but I'm not sure we can do anything about the fact that there are some ESCs that after repeated requests still have not been willing to commit someone to this work.
Unless they're an ESC that submitted a name to go to SAS and they haven't been able to go.
Yeah. Shelby?
It could be financial. And then the other thing I was going to say, well, you are going to have a few ESCs who are going to have no one. Seriously. We have like an ESC neighboring who has 0 people in their curriculum department. They don't have a curriculum department. They don't have anybody do this stuff. They simply have an alternative school for kids, and the superintendent is often covering classes. So that situation, you're probably they're going to want to reach out to a neighboring, I think there are those situations, Kathy, as a genuine reason maybe why some don't have one, but then I think maybe the others, it may be financial, or maybe they do really have somebody who could do the work, but they just can't send them. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Shelby?
So what I was thinking through here, I think, Allie, your point makes sense about doing some more targeted updates to the map right now. There is that group that was going to attend SAS and wasn't able to. So if discussions can be had about those skills and qualifications and openness to be added as a contact, we can consider that in those specific cases. For those ESCs or SSTs where we know there isn't current representation and they weren't going to send someone to SAS, I think that with the envisioning of how we want to see this network grow with the credentials down the line, I think the next contact with those specific folks is a targeted relationship building. We're expanding this. It's not going to just be about SAS. So if the financial concern was there, it might not be anymore. Would you consider, do you have staff that you would like to get involved in the network as a whole? Get them on the listserv, make sure they're seeing the opportunities for training, and let them experience the value that we're hoping brings to everyone. And we have that slow build to get them on board, join the training, and as credentials become available, hopefully we can expand that way, versus it being more of a hard line, like we need a name now. And I think, Christy, it's a really good point about there might be some ESCs that we're just never going to get anyone from, and we're going to start noting that and tracking it in a contact sheet so we can be a little bit more clear for our own understanding, like, we can follow up with them again in a year, but here's the bottom line for this group or this entity at this moment. So I think
you've done your due diligence then, reaching out to them, trying to make every opportunity possible, you know, that's all you can do.
Yeah. And instead of adding folks, I know there's a concern about that quality to green opening the floodgates. So before we just add folks onto the map without the credentials, try to get them involved now so that when the credentials are available, they're already on board with taking those trainings and getting there. And then we'll start adding that contact info is a way we could approach it.
Well, I always know when I'm in a minority position. It's rare, but it happens. But nevertheless, I really do appreciate your comments on this. You know, this is something that's been on my mind as we transition into this whole new area of the SLDS grant, and I think that it's going to continue to be an issue. And please realize that, and please understand that your input on this is going to be important to work forward with it. Okay. So we have one more item, discussion of committee work for this year. So we have 4 committees, and it's sort of a strange year to be talking about things on the work of these committees, although at least in the special ed case, it seems that the SLDS grant will sort of become the object of the work. And I don't know, for those of you who are the committee chairs and co-chairs, whether you've given thought at all as to what needs to happen moving forward. So I'd like to turn it over to you guys to sort of tell me what's on your mind. And I'll take volunteers or call on people, but Tom, you're right in the middle of my screen. Candace, you're right there too. So why don't we let the two of you? I mean, is that worthwhile? Is it the work on working toward with the higher education committee? Is this a good time to do it? Is it a good time just to stop things and do other things right now?
Tom, do you want to go or you want me to talk?
I was gonna say, I don't know if we want to just stop things, but at the same time, I think we understand, you know, this may not be the most opportune time to get people to work with us on certain things. I know the 2 universities I'm dealing with that I talk to a lot, they're in major budget cuts, and people are like hoping to hold on to positions. And so I think maybe periodically just an email and, hey, we're here, but I don't know if it's anything that we need to be pushing, you know, hard on. I mean, it's more of just, you know, kind of seeing what happens, I guess, would be a way. Candace, I'm assuming you're going to probably agree, but go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. We're in the same situation in this area. I think there's some good work and a lot of future potential in that partnership and in that work. So I certainly don't recommend that we just stop, but I think that we press pause and maybe move a little slower, and when appropriate, but continue that work and continue that focus, because at some point it's going to be there's going to be a lot of value in those partnerships.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that I think that while the focus is still has to be on the issue of value added, just as with everything else in this work, we need to broaden the perspective, and I think that's a good thing. But you might want to make sure that maybe committee members are in touch with people, and you know, to let them know that this hasn't gone away.
Mm-hmm.
All right, just give that some thought. If there's anything in particular that you're planning, let's talk about it. Mindy, moving around there. Mindy and James,
Yes, sure. So resources and value added, I don't really see that there's anything else to do on that this year, given that it was created. There's a new dashboard that we're not getting the new dashboard. So I would say that would all be tabled. In terms of expanding to other resources and beyond value added, I think it's worthwhile a discussion of, as this network grows up, the resources committee took the SAS and unbranded and rebranded them and Ohioized them. But if we're going to go the path of there's RFPs to create the tools, is that the pathway? And it's not from a resources committee. So maybe as we grow up, the resources is not part of the way the network works on developing tools and PD.
Well, there's the short run issue of, if as the new value added reports are out there, we want to make sure that the materials that we have right now are not outdated and not useful.
But we're not going to have any new value added data. They're just going to update.
Not the data, the reports themselves, the look and feel. And maybe this is not a big task, but and it's maybe for later on in the year. But that's one thing that we need to make sure that we're on top of.
I thought the only thing that was going to get updated was the projections was going to get with the new people in there, so the rostering was correct.
Marianne, I think SAS has in mind that their plan is to have the new reports available later on in this school year, right?
Yeah, sometime. So they will do a separate release. So, when we get the reports in like September, hang on one. Sorry, guys, I'm getting bandwidth issues again. So when we get the reports in September, they will be under the old look, the existing, it'll stay very similar with just some updated text. But then sometime later in the year, later in the school year, it may not even be in the calendar year, it may be early 2021. We're still kind of talking through with them when it would happen. They would do sort of a soft release. So it will just be an update of the website. No new data. It'll just have a new look and feel. But we want to talk with them. One of the things we had talked about was doing a webinar with you, just to remember and remind you and what the old system was, and then sort of here's where it's going to morph and how it's going to look when it's new. So we don't have a date. And like I said, it may not even be till early 2021, depending on what other things SAS has going with us. But that's the plan, is to try to do something in the middle of the year so that they can see the 2019 districts and schools can see their 2019 report data under the new look and feel.
Yeah, so I guess I would just say we'd have to revisit it in that to see how this whole pandemic is shaped. Like,
yeah,
we can't have a discussion today about what things are going to look like in January.
I understand, but I guess to put together resources that are Ohioized, and some of them are fine, but some of them will look different and feel different than what school districts will be using in the future. So I just want to make sure that we think about how we might use some people's time to update that. Might not happen until the spring, maybe not even until next summer.
Right, absolutely. They'll need redone once it's updated, and they give us the updated versions. We'll go through and do our stuff with it again.
All right. Sharon Christine.
Hi, this is Sherry. I know that our group was still new, and one of the things that we were working on was helping educate professionals around special education data, specifically the SPP data. And then that was delayed initially due to the changes in disproportionality. And so it maybe, I don't know, Christine, what do you think? It might be something we need to think about pausing until that time, maybe closer to December when some information is coming out, unless we want to keep working on the scenarios that we were. But I think some of them have already been used. ODE has already used some of our conversations around like graduation data, for example, in some of their guidance that has come out. So I don't know if there's still a need for that or not.
Yeah, I would agree with that because I think we were on a trajectory to kind of support that. And then, like you said, things got delayed. I think there's still a need for the committee, but we may want to just wait a little bit until we actually have some data. And once we know kind of a timeline of when to expect that, then we could resume having some meetings and preparing for that.
All right, so one thing that I just want to point out is as you look at the SLDS information that Ali sent out, make sure you familiarize yourself with that portion that deals with the special ed data, because this is a case of, I think that we're going to be looking about specifically how the network expands its reach in terms of the data perspective.
Okay.
And maybe the committee can be a part of that in some way.
That makes sense. Yeah, we'll definitely take a look at that.
Okay. Gary, Angela, I'm sorry, did someone have?
Well, I was just going to say, so yes, we definitely want to keep it, but maybe pick up in later fall.
Okay.
Does that sound reasonable? Okay.
Yeah. Gary, Angela, any thoughts?
Yeah, ours is just to continue advocating in any way we can, the positive ways of using value added, obviously, but also other data. The biggest thing, or one of the things, as Matt knows, is we were asked to potentially do a presentation at the BASA conference, and obviously any kind of events like that our group can be a part of to help get the positive word out. That will be a big thing. But you know, another thing is just the idea of transitioning to OTES 2.0. I think that opens up a big opportunity for all the RDLs to work with districts in showing what are the ways that you can use value added. I'm assuming most districts, most of ours are sticking with 1.0 for one more year. And so this will be a time to kind of get them ready for 2.0 and start showing them ways that they can use value added in a positive way to help plan their lessons or adjust their lessons or reflect on their lessons. And so those are things that, you know, when you were just talking about resources and things like that, maybe that is something that our committee works together, is just to come up with some examples of how are you using it in conjunction with OTES 2.0 in a meaningful way. Now that we're not using it as a score, how are you using it to drive your instruction? So we could potentially kind of use some of those resources that were developed during those trainings in 1, 2, and 3 this spring to kind of help build some ideas for practical and realistic ideas for districts to use. But those are the two main things that came to my mind right away. But I know Angela had a couple things too.
And we did a presentation in the spring with some other ESCs about formulating the data story. So working with districts about not necessarily analyzing data in isolation, but really figuring out what the different data points is telling us, and then constructing a story around that, and then that makes our next steps a little bit stronger. So doing some education regarding not just value added and how it uses in the evaluation, but because OTES 2.0 needs 2 high quality points of data, seeing how at least those 2 points are collaborating with each other in order to tell a greater picture or a story for districts and teachers and students.
Angela, who's the audience for that?
I'm sorry.
Who was the audience for that?
So that was pretty much open to anyone. So we had a lot of administrators, some teachers, some central office staff within those presentations.
Because as you talked about it, I was just thinking that maybe there's also a way to use that perspective with the RDLs themselves as an audience. You know, one of the issues that we face is a lot of people, as they come on and start working in this as new people into the network, they don't have the same background and experience that some of you guys have had, and you know, maybe there's a way to work that into sort of a little professional development of the network itself.
Sure, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And as I sit here, it's probably maybe not appropriate for the kickoff of the year webinar, but maybe at some point during the year, there would be another webinar that is RDLs talking to RDLs kind of thing, and might engage several of you, but in that kind of message.
Sure. Absolutely.
All right, just give that some thought, and maybe we can talk about it some other time. All right, we're running out of time for this. Anything that any of you have to bring up relevant to the RDL network? A couple of you have been very quiet, and maybe I should appreciate that.
Man, I don't have much to say, but I think you did a good job organizing the information today and providing some clarity on some of those important topics.
Brian, and you get another glass of wine for that.
Wow, am I up to a whole glass now? I'm very excited by that. Payday's coming, buddy. Payday's coming.
Yeah, I know. Allie, Chris, Marianne, Shelby, anything that you want to say?
Now I just want to say thank you to everybody for logging in on Wednesday afternoon when the weather looks, at least here, is very nice. Taking a 2-hour meeting. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Ditto.
All right, guys. Have a good day. Stay safe.
Yep. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.